Thank you so much for the kind invitation. Let me thank Harshali and Srinetra Eye Care for this opportunity. So after the charismatic talk by Dr. MS, I will try to do justice to this talk as much as possible. So this talk is titled Near Missed Clues and Turning Points in Pediatric and Neuro-Ophthalmology. So I'll start with few cases because they will bring more sense into what I'm talking about. So this was a 19-year-old otherwise healthy girl who came to me for a second opinion. She accidentally noticed blurry vision during a driving license test about 6 months back. And ever since, she felt her vision is progressively decreasing. So she was evaluated in an institute elsewhere in detail with all her relevant investigations. Her best corrected visual acuity was 6/24 N6 OU, and she had a very minimal cylindrical refractive error. Her pupils were okay, no RAPD, good color vision. So this was a fundus, and all investigations were reported within normal limits. So I thought, what is the amblyogenic factor here? She was referred as a case of refractive amblyopia to me. So I said, what is the amblyogenic factor here because of which she has 6/24, no further improvement with glasses? And somebody even thought she was malingering, but there were some red flags which I couldn't answer. She didn't have a significant refractive error. There was no manifest squint. Her structural and functional evaluation was reported as normal. So what's really going on? So I repeated all the electrophysiological investigations, including a full field DRG and a VEP, which were essentially within normal limits. Okay. So then I said, let me go and look at the patient once again. So that's when I did a 90-day examination of her fundus. And I thought there were a few fine subretinal precipitates at the macula. And maybe, I don't know. So I thought, let me look at the OCT again. I don't know if you can see, there were tiny subretinal precipitates at the macula. So the OCT, when I looked again, was showing some foveal atrophy with ISOS junction disruption at the macula. Can you see that? Yes. So this was clearly not any amblyopia. We were looking at a subtle macular dystrophy here. Okay, despite the fact she had N6 vision. So that's when I did an OCT FAF. Can you see this? This picture is very characteristic of a macular dystrophy. You have a central hyper, then a hypo, and a translucent hyper again. So we did a multifocal ERG, and you can see that the foveal peaks are definitely diminished. In the left eye, it's hardly there, but in the right eye, it is diminished. But the parafoveal and perifoveal responses are good. Okay. So how to confirm your diagnosis? Because everything else was normal, including MRI. So we went ahead with genetic analysis. And that came out positive for ABCA4 causing a cone road dystrophy or a Stargardt's disease. Now it came out as a variant of uncertain significance, but in the correct context, this is relevant because ABCA4 is known to produce this kind of macular dystrophy. So this was a case of ABCA4 macular dystrophy, which was masquerading as amblyopia. So what is ABCA4? You need to understand what is ABCA4 before you understand the disease. It's a major transporter protein which is present in the outer segment disc membranes. And if it is not there, what happens? All the toxic retinoids of phototransduction will accumulate in the retina and they will be eaten up by the RP lysosomes, and the lipofusion, then a net product of the metabolism, lipofusion will start accumulating in the RP. RP undergoes atrophy and eventually there is photoreceptor death. So this is what is happening. So this is what she had. So the take-home message is, all that does not see well is not always amblyopia. So you investigate well, establish the amblyogenic risk factor before you label the patient as amblyopia. Okay, now moving on to the second case, this was a very difficult decision. An 8-year-old otherwise healthy girl, she had an accidental fall from cot about a week back, after which she developed double vision and inward deviation of the eyes. So the parents had already consulted a pediatrician and a neurosurgeon, and a CT scan was also done, which was essentially normal. But since the diplopia was persistent, they came to me. And when I saw her, good vision, double vision, but good vision, no headache, no loss of consciousness, no vomiting, fundus did not show any papilledema, color vision was good, pupils were good, so no neurological signs, only an acute onset of ESO deviation. So this was, it looks like a traumatic 6-nerve palsy, isn't it? But then I decided to, I wasn't very happy with it because when I asked the history, the fall was very trivial. She just slipped from the bed, which was hardly, it was not at a great height. So, and she also had subtle abduction limitation in the other eye. She also had an end gaze nystagmus. So these were some red flags in my mind, and I said, okay, I will start you on a course of steroids, but let me get an MRI first. So this was the red flags which I had in my mind. So is it a straightforward squint or a sinister sign? And to my surprise, the MRI was a revelation. It was a diffuse intrinsic pontine glioma. Can you see the enhancing mass here in the pons? Yes. So this was a diffuse intrinsic pontine glioma, which is a fatal tumor. It's an aggressive brainstem lesion, typically affecting young children, known to present with acute onset 6-nerve palsy. The median survival rate is less than 1 year. The median 5-year survival rate is 3.3%. So this was picked up only because we did an MRI. The CT totally missed it. So the take home, I would say, is that acute onset squint in a child is always neurological unless proven otherwise. And the investigation of choice is a contrast-enhanced MRI and nothing else. So dig deep into the history, and if you are suspicious, do an MRI and don't stop with the CT alone. And also, even if you don't have a paralytic squint, acute acquired comitant esotropia, in which the movements appear to be normal and there is no, side gaze incomitance, can also be a potential presentation of brain tumors. So again, an MRI is mandatory before you operate them. So we had some experience and we published in the Kerala Journal of Ophthalmology. In our study of 12 patients with AACE, 25% had systemic issues. 1% had pontine glioma, and the rest had myasthenia and other conditions which, warranted treatment. So be careful about squints in children. Investigate well before you think about surgery. Case 3 is, I would like to call it as, if it is not in the differential, it won't be in the diagnosis. So this was a 40-year-old lady she came to my OPD around 5:30 in the evening, and I was just about to shut shop and go home. That's when she came, referred by a colleague saying that it is bilateral optic neuritis or papilledema. I don't know what it is. Please take care. So she's a known diabetic hypertensive, gradual onset of eye pain and blurry vision for the last 2 weeks, but she had been having some headache and vomiting for the last 1 month, which she says has worsened now. So when I checked her visual acuity, it was 6/36 N18 in the right eye and 6/60 N18, like that. She wasn't very cooperative. She was having severe headache. She refused to sit on the slit lamp also, and we could just make out that the pupils were very tonic and sluggish. Intraocular pressure was okay. She had cataract also, and undilated, I could just see the disc and they looked hyperemic and edematous to me. That's all I could see because she was very symptomatic. She wanted to lie down. So these were the thoughts running in my mind. I was tired too. Headache, vomiting, blurry vision, bilateral disc edema, patient in distress. Is it papilledema, malignant hypertension, optic neuritis? Because the headache was so severe, I even thought, is it subarachnoid hemorrhage? I mean, she's so much in pain, So I immediately sent her for an MRI after checking the blood pressure. Blood pressure was normal. To my surprise, the MRI came as normal. Okay. So that is when I thought, let me have a look at her eye again. So this is how her slit lamp was. What did I miss? The AC was on shallower side. Okay, AC was only Van Herrick's grade 1 to 2. And the pupils were tonic. There were small, subtle cells there, a few pigments and cells there, which I missed because I was biased, and I was tired. And this was a fundus, hazy view. Was it just because of the cataract? So that's when I thought, let me, dilate her, even if she has this thing, I try to dilate her. And, she was having beginning of Busakas and Kopi's noodles all around. And there was definitely a flare. And the OCT, that was a total revelation. What is this? What do you think this is? So this is what happens when you do not dilate and make a presumptive diagnosis. You can see RP undulations and multiple serous detachments with disc edema. It's a Vogt-Koyanagi-Haradas disease, which you totally missed. You would have sent the patient to the neurologist, they would have done lumbar puncture. Luckily, IVMP works in VKH, but patient will keep getting it back. So luckily, we picked it up on the second visit, and patient was promptly given IVMP and tapered to oral steroids and subsequently switched to methotrexate. So she's doing well now. So if you do not dilate and see the fundus in toto, you can miss everything. So take-home message is all disc edemas are not always neurological. In a rush to identify a brain lesion, the eye is overlooked. Please dilate and see the patient and take help of OCT if you cannot make any sense of it, because OCT is a great investigation. I absolutely love it. So rule out ophthalmic pathology before neuroimaging, because the neurologist thinks that you have ruled out all these things before sending it to him. Okay. Case 4 is the unexpected. So that's because it was totally unexpected. This was a 12-year-old healthy girl. She had been noticing defective vision since last 1 year. You can see she has this dirty looking cataract in both eyes. Visual acuity was also bad. So it was a routine cataract and she was 12 years old. I proceeded with lens aspiration with the in-the-bag IOL and yeah, everything was fine. It went uneven full. Next day, when I went for post-op rounds, the parents said she has been vomiting 2-3 times, doctor. So when I saw her on the slit lamp, I don't know if you can see very clearly, she has this anterior segment inflammation is there. There are pigments on the IOL and in the AC, IOP was 40 when we checked with eye care. Okay, so we thought probably it is just a post-op inflammation or something. We gave her, since IOP was 40, I started on oral Diamox along with topical and oral steroids because extensive iris inflammation was there, severe pigment dissipation, something like TAS was there. Luckily, in a day or two, it settled. IOP control cells reduced. They were from Lakshadweep, so they want to go back. The ship is moving. We have to go. You said surgery today, and after 3 days, I can go. Now, don't make us wait. Okay, reluctantly, I agreed to discharge them. Telling them, giving them a course of oral steroids and strictly telling them about dilating drops and topical steroids. Then I also forgot about it. After 6 months, the mummy returns or the cataract returns. So this is what she came back with, this very severe fibrovascular membrane in the pupillary axis. Now, when we try, this was actually in front of the IOL, this membrane, okay. So the cataract returns and I had a tough time removing it surgically. I had to use an MVR blade to pierce it. I had to take help of my senior consultant, Dr. Sai Kumar also, how to break this membrane. It was so tough. Finally, we had to take an MVR blade and cut it in, poke the membrane and then cut it bit by bit. Took almost about 1 hour for me to clear this dense, thick fibrovascular membrane, then eventually cutting it off with the vitrector. But eventually we achieved clear visual access. So what I want to tell you is that take-home message is, please don't be lax in your post-op care. And especially if you have a post-op inflammation, insist on frequent follow-ups because you're going to end up in massive trouble, because in pediatric cataracts, you know, the cataract is only the first step. The post-op care is extremely important because the after cataract can be as bad. After cataract or a dense membrane can be even worse than the original cataract. So the eye is not fixed with cataract surgery in a child. It's only the beginning of the finish line or the starting gun. You have to follow up the patient continuously throughout, literally throughout the patient's life. Okay, if I have time, I can move to this last case, which is totally bizarre. This was a 13-year-old boy who came to us in 2022. I've been following him from 2022 onwards for second opinion for subnormal vision. Okay, so he has been using glasses since for the last 9 years. So he was a firstborn term baby, normal delivery, good birth weight, but there was second-degree parental consanguinity in the family. The parents were first cousins. So this was the anterior segment. If you see the right eye, you can see that there is some amount of peripheral anterior synecdoche with iris atrophy in the right eye. Post-dilatation, what do you think it is? High myopia, microspherophakia, isn't it? The lens is, the edge, everything is visible, small globular lens. So I diagnosed it as microspherophakia. Good. So when you look at the fundus, this is the fundus, large cupping, isn't it? When I checked the IOP, it was 26 to 28 like that. So in this setting, what do you think? High myopia, high intraocular pressures, glaucomatous cupping. I measured the axial length, it was within normal limits. So is the myopia entirely lenticular? That was my thought. Anyways, so high myopia, microspherophakia, shallow AC, iris changes, high IOP, glaucomatous cupping, and patient is like this, tall, little Marfanoid. So my first thought was, is it Marfan syndrome? So we sent for a chromosomal microarray to the geneticist, and Marfan's microarray was negative. Okay, so I thought, okay, this is not Marfan's, this is something else. So we started him on anti-glaucoma measures, did a YAC PI in both eyes under topical anesthesia, IOP reduced, his IOP was subsequently controlled, and patient was given my glasses, and he was doing well. Till last July 2025, when he came back with a sudden drop in the left eye associated with pain. No history of trauma. Vision in the right eye was still good with glasses, 6/6 N6. Left eye, it was only counting fingers close to face. So IOP recorded by my optometrist was normal, 12 in the right eye and 10 in the left eye. So this is the anterior segment. Though the AC is still shallow, but despite that, the cornea is very clear in both the eyes. So it cannot account for the counting fingers, isn't it? So this AC is shallow. We dilated him. Post-dilatation, lens was clear, still the same. And the left eye also cannot explain the counting fingers. Okay, so I thought there is a refractive change. I did the refraction. It is almost the same. That's when I looked into the fundus, and what do you see here? What do you see? Do you see fine radiating lines from the macula? So that is what I thought. I first thought it was ILM folds, and I thought, is it hypotony? I mean, is it a hypotonic maculopathy? And that's when I checked his intraocular pressures myself. And to me, then I understood it was only 3, okay, in the left eye. So that is the thing, when you delegate your duty to somebody else, you may not get correct values. So if in doubt, you have to check it yourself, okay. So now, sudden vision loss, microspherophakia, anterior dislocation, hypotony. From glaucoma, he has gone into hypotony. What is the reason? So these were the thoughts which were running in my mind. Is the patient having RD, CD, optic neuritis, all these things? P-scan didn't show anything. No RD, no CD. What is the reason? So anterior AGM was stopped. He was put on a large diameter bandage contact lens. And we thought we'll send him to a higher center for a second opinion because I am not understanding the reason. Then I thought probably he has a iridocyclitis because of which he's developed shutdown of the ciliary body and he's gone into hypotony. I started him on topical steroids. And I thought, okay, I'll call him another day. And I called him another day and I asked one of my colleagues who's also a very keen clinician to take a look. Okay, so that's when she noticed this thing. What do you see in there? Do you see some scleral thinning at the yellow arrow? Do you see that? Okay, what is that? These are spontaneous filtering blebs. So this is a spontaneous filtering bleb which was happening in a child with previous glaucoma on AGM. What is the reason for this? We didn't do any surgery for him. He didn't sustain any trauma. That's when we looked at the family as a whole. Consanguineous marriage. Second child is also ditto. Family history, high myopia, microspherophakia, shallow AC, the same kind of picture. And the maternal aunt also has the same. And they all have this beaked nose. With a typical facies, and this is Shavaf-Trabulsi syndrome, which is a very rare condition in which you get spontaneous scleral filtering blebs leading to hypotony because of the lens going and hitting across the sclera. So when we took the history, this guy had a history of aortic root dilatation on echocardiogram, and he also had a diaphragmatic hernia surgery at the age of 7 days just after birth. So we did the genetic evaluation and it clinched the diagnosis, came out positive for ASPH gene, which is causing Trabulsi syndrome, autosomal recessive inheritance, possibly got from both parents, coming from the same family. Okay. So what is Trabulsi syndrome is that it is also a cause for ectopia lentis, lesser known cause for ectopia lentis. Marfan's is a more, it is a better known cause. It can also produce shallow AC, iris changes, IOP will be high, glaucomatous changes, and the characteristic feature is spontaneous conjunctival filtering blebs causing hypotony eventually. And the systemic features are also seen like cardiac and lung pathologies. The phenotype is a strong clue. So only if you know that this phenotype with the beak nose and these filtering blebs are there, you can make the diagnosis. So the knowledge of that is very important. So the treatment is lensectomy for these children because the other eye is also going to develop. So the take-home message is, when you're at your wit's end, go for a second opinion. Do not let your ego come in between you and the diagnosis. Talk to a colleague because collaboration is key. So these are some clinical pearls which I would like to highlight. Take the history yourself. And instinct, trust your instinct always. If something is not right, your mind is saying it is likely to be so. Map the damage with relevant investigations like visual fields, OCT, electrophysiological tests, and if required, even genetic evaluation. And when in doubt, do consult your colleagues and use all these investigations to your advantage. Thank you very much.